Okay, I'm back with my good friend Stan in Moscow. I'm in New Zealand. This is Tate. I'm hosting a live show here that we will cover some important events happening geopolitically with Russia. Investment opportunities always are underlined here. And I'm with my good friend Stan Grafsky, who's in Moscow. He's got his boots on the ground there with investors. He specializes in bringing foreign investors into Russia. And he's done that for close to 30 years. He knows what he's talking about. He's a lawyer, he's a businessman, he's a consultant. He's a trustworthy guy. He's the kind of guy that can guide you, no matter how experienced you are. He can guide you into channels in various industrial structures can sign contracts. He can pave the way for you to get there and then take you through there for the contract negotiations and coordinate follow-ups as well. So he is your man on the ground for hire, and he's a good guy. A lot of great references, a lot of great experiences. Stan, how are you doing?
Thank you, Tate. Not bad for the Russian home country.
Yeah, well, Russia's in the news every day. They've got fake news, and CNN got into a lot of trouble recently by admitting that they were faking the propaganda against Russia. There's a guy that did Project Veritas. That's been in the news. I follow that side of things a little bit, maybe more than you do. It's interesting for me. But I know you've been into this St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. You've given me an agenda here. We briefly talked about it, and we're going to cover the Trump, the counter measures for the sanctions, the Trump meeting, and Vietnam as a test bed for other countries that may be jumping on to this train, as you said. Do you want to start off, or should we cover? I mean, I also have some things geopolitically. It looks like things are just coming to a head more and more. Every time things escalate, I think, well, that's it. Now we're going to either have a conflict that gets to a hot war, or we're going to have finally some level heads prevail, and we'll see common sense, and they'll finally allow Russia a normal position in the world, which that's all they've wanted. That's all they've said they wanted. That's all they've demonstrated they've wanted. All of the accusations have proven to be false. I could go on and on. I don't want to do that. Let's go to the main issues on your agenda, Stan, because I know you have a good program here for us. We're going to talk about the St. Peter's. What happened at that St. Petersburg International Economics Forum? I know it was a big event. What happened there?
Well, thank you once again for such a pleasant introduction. I didn't believe it is about me. Anyway, so yeah, if we talk about St. Petersburg Forum, which took place a month ago, actually it's months already, a month passed after it, now we can look at its results, and it's very interesting. First of all, no matter it originally comes from Russia, it is international event, famous for gathering most prominent politicians in this country, leading in most innovative businesses, at least those who want to join. And this year, an international place who are interested in checking the grounds, meeting directly with decision makers, both in business and in politics, observing hot discussions. And one of those was Mr. Putin discussion with Megyn, once again, Riley. Megyn Kelly, I forgot her family name all the time. It was really, really interesting discussion, which I think glued half of the country, because it was quite, on one hand, was provoking, but on the other hand, it at moments I was feeling I'm really proud I'm Russian, because Putin behaved really balanced, but the arguments were absolutely unbeatable. But nevertheless, a part of my feelings as a Russian, most important thing I think for those who've been there, at least watched it, is rather as a litmus test for everyone who, no matter which size it is, in particular, and this year forum proves that, not only for blue chips and big players, but also for small and medium enterprises. It makes lots of sense to watch what's happening. And the biggest lesson came out of this forum was, a part of being the most represented, it's over 14,000 attendees, participating parties, with the biggest delegation from the United States, which was not supported in the last few years by previous administration, and it was a really, really striking sample how many businesses came here from the States.
The most represented was the United States.
Yeah, which in the previous years, Obama's administration put every pressure, directly and indirectly, to stop those guys, or at least allow them to send their representatives, but not CEOs. And this year, it is completely different. And but most important, I think, message out of this forum, and in particular after meetings with Mr. Putin and his minister, who were over 30 ministers were represented here and available for direct discussions, not to mention the Russian businesses, of course, on their stands in discussion panels and discussion clubs, is that Russia as a country brings more and more incentives for international players to play fair game on this market. So, and one of the key messages, very topical one, with clear agenda how it could be applied, is about digital economy, as I call it, mantra by Putin. He announced at this forum saying from now on, and the biggest focus of the Russian government is digital economy. Digital economy.
Investors out there should be listening to this. If Putin and all of Russia is behind Putin these days, I mean, and Putin is driving technology, that's got to get some people's attention. And people would be wise to try to be first if they can, see where their niche is, investigate, look at the opportunities. They have full support to get in now, and less restrictions than before. This is an opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think, namely, it might be huge opportunities for, let's say, Silicon Valley IT companies immediately, or anyone from any part of the world who can bring technologies or know-hows which are likely either not present in this country or rather competitive. And government supports that, backs up with the government funds, which is probably the most important message from Putin and his ministers. It's not just words or intentions. It is about a structured approach to stimulate everyone who can bring technology solutions into this country and put it in play. And from the ground point, or let's say practical point of view, I would say the only point to keep in mind is that you just need, as a market entrant, think about medium to long-term investment, not necessarily the big one in terms of the value, or billions or millions. It doesn't really matter. It's more important is your approach to come here and expand on this market. Why? For a very simple reason. Mr. Putin wants to support local taxpayers. Even take into account that tax burden here is relatively, well, in my opinion, comparing with, let's say, continent or advanced countries, definitely, no question asked, lower than on an average with other countries. Not to mention personal income or entrepreneurs. Well, I have a few entrepreneurs who registered here these days and prefer being on a Russian tax burden, paying 6% from sales and nothing else, rather than being
from sales and nothing else. That's
VAT, nothing. Yeah, no income tax anyway. Once you clarify yourself as a small business player, well, it's obviously focused to small businesses with sales under 1 million euros approximately a year, which is very helpful to those with knowledge or know-how.
Yeah. And for big players, it's still very inexpensive. How does it go if it's more than €1 million?
Well, you cannot be. You would go into another scale, so-called general tax scale, which means VAT of 18% applies, plus income or profit tax at 20%.
Okay.
But once again, Russian VAT is the second lowest after the UK in Europe, and 20%, it's still more than reasonable. But what is not visible at first sight, many regions and governments in this country, in order to attract players from outside, allowed to reduce this tax burden by 19% out of 20%. And that is done intentionally by the federal government and Mr. Putin, just to put them in competition.
So in other words, Putin has given the right of regional governors to reduce the tax burden from 20 all the way down to 1%.
Yeah, kind of. So in this case, local governments would not receive direct taxation from the profit tax, but they would receive additional benefits from extra employment, from individual income taxes, and so on and so forth. And we already have experience, let's say, from Tatarstan is the most striking sample where local government in the last number of years was supporting international businesses. And if you look at it, it's a kind of, well, to me, it looks like a Mecca, or,
Kazakhstan has gone through a lot of changes, and Moscow is unbelievable. The pictures I see there, I can't believe it's actually exists, the city, because when I was there I left in 2007, it's a completely different city in just a short period of time. In St. Petersburg, the same thing.
Well,
a lot of investment, transformation. Yeah.
So the key, back to the forum and what international players might be interested, or at least consider, keep in mind in terms of their international investors. Definitely keep this country in mind. Again, digital economy mantra and anything in the advanced technologies is one story, but don't forget about the rest of other industries and niches, which are still huge and a lot of opportunities. So forum was here to articulate Mr. Putin's direct address to American businesses in the discussion club when they got together. What he said: please help me, you're business leaders, please help me to bring my message to your political decision makers. We're losing opportunities. We have opportunities here. We need your knowledge and skills and products. In other words, what he was saying, we have money.
Yeah.
But we need you here.
The media is not helping getting the message out. The politicians are not helping getting the message out. The West has an agenda, and there's some stories about about that. In fact, that's a constant theme in the alternative news about this horrible anti-Russian agenda being pushed by globalists against Russia for certain agenda missions that they have articulated over many years. You know, basically one world government is what it comes down to. And that's not a conspiracy. That's an actual fact. And Russia is a target, and Russia knows this, and China knows that they're not far behind, if they're behind at all. But what you're saying is that Putin is talking directly to the leaders of industries in the US, and the US was the largest represented this year, which is a big difference from the Obama administration. And technology is leading the way. There is money put forward for these people and huge tax benefits, and all he asks in return is become a taxpayer. We have low tax, we have great benefits. Don't think of yourselves in like 90s during Yeltsin era where you can come in, sell and expatriate all your profits and say goodbye to Russia. Those days are gone. Putin wants a fair deal.
Yeah, correct. Well, and those who are present here for many years already know that it's all the opportunities are all here.
Well, I just repeated what you said, so that's really great. Thanks for giving all that out, Stan. That's fantastic. Any other notes you have on the SPEIF?
Well, in my opinion, well, first of all, it was a really great a platform for those who are really interested in this economy, even just for checking the grounds, because it was a plethora of media reviews and independent reviews by participants from a number of the countries represented there, who got the feedback from the players, and ironically, a lot of regional, in other words, provincial businesses were Russian representing their products at their stands, spontaneously establishing partnerships with quite a big number of international players, businesses. That's what was articulated already in the media. Well, I'm not, I don't remember at the top of my head those names, but even in terms of the number of deals concluded, it is the biggest in 20 years history, the biggest event. Well, basically, we're talking about dozens of billions of dollars of deals concluded. It's something. To be truthful, yeah, let's say half of them realistically government-backed. That's for sure. In particular, in the priority industries, that's no wonder. But nevertheless, it's also a great opportunity to meet real business players here and get your own feedback of what is happening here. And we saw that a number of quite a lot of a big number of those deals, which are when asked, they say no comments. The deal is concluded, but no comments. I understand, and particularly in those very sensitive technology or IT industries, every day counts realistically, and you have to keep your mouth shut until your launch or something like that. So that's one of the keys, I think, interesting events which are very much open in terms of the materials on the media, on the internet, including in English and French on the website, plus tons of comments. And anyone who's interested can look for Google SPIEF 2017, which stands for St. Petersburg International Economic Forum 2017, or anything related with that. It's very interesting.
There's a lot of information on that subject out there, and it was almost overshadowed by Megyn Kelly's performance, which was seen to be quite humorous And I think it went a long way to expose just how fraudulent the anti-Russian sentiment is from the West and from the media in particular and from politicians. She probably would, I don't think the KGB or Putin or any number of people with any amount of money would have done a better job of explaining how bankrupt the ideas are for having an anti-Russian sentiment built up to such feverish levels as what they've done. They've made it into bombshell news that Russia's interfering with elections. Russia's so bad, doing so many things, that they're everywhere. It's absurd, and the absurdity was presented so eloquently by a person who tried her best to present it as a factual issue. And Putin did perfect by not getting defensive, just simply explaining himself in very clear language. Her tactic is to force someone to answer a question 4 times, and then she'll use the worst answer. Even if the answer is a stalled response, she'll take that stalled moment and show that the person's indecisive, even if it's his 4th time or her 4th time. That's her tactic. But she's playing these children's tactics against a very experienced, intelligent, and strong man. Let's just face it. He's dealing with real issues in a real country that deals with things in a serious way. She's absolutely no threat to him. Personally, he had no problems managing that. I thought it was fantastic, and the internet went alive with that one. So if SPIAF wasn't on the road map before, it is now, and Megyn Kelly's probably there to thank. And Obama's there to thank, just like you said before, for making Russia a self-sufficient country, which is one of the things that I've got in my articles. Russia is actually the most self-sufficient country on the planet right now. They rely the least on other countries for what they need day to day. 11 time zones of sufficiency. Okay, you had another, should we go to the next? Is there anything else you want to talk about with SPIAF?
Well, we can talk about a lot of issues, but it's kind of a rather detailed issues or topics which might be of interest to very, let's say, focused people. But basically, the key message, I think, well, as far as I understood this this event, I think we already pretty much covered. So the rest could be found on the internet.
Okay, it was successful, and it's technology, and there's opportunities for investors. And Stan is the one who can either hold your hand from the airport to the boardroom, or he can plug you into certain aspects as needed by contract. And Stan, I know you can deliver. I've heard the stories. Let's go to the Russian countermeasures and the sanctions. Let's begin with that. If you don't mind, Stan, how did these sanctions get into place? I mean, did Russia invade Ukraine? Because I saw an article put out by Russia Insider where someone archived all of the different times, and I'm in New Zealand now. I've seen the newspapers. Russia has invaded Ukraine, Reuters, AP, New York Times, LA Times, and they put it again and again and again. They counted, I forget now, but it wasn't for the full 3 years. I think it was at the 2-year mark. They had already something like 150 headline stories, not just in one paper. I mean, stories that covered the earth about what Russia's doing in Ukraine over and over, waves of them covered by everyone, and nothing. Who's in Ukraine? NATO, with all their tanks and soldiers and contracts to frack the eastern part that they are bombing, that they're paying the Ukrainians to bomb. I mean, I'm smiling. It's horrible. It's many people actually dying. It's a horrible thing that really frustrates and angers me. But when I put it in a comedic approach, I mean, who do these guys think they are? The sanctions came from blaming Russia for a lot of things that Russia didn't do, and the main one was Ukraine related, and then it flipped over to Syria and then to electioning. It just goes on and on. They'll never stop. They'll never stop until, well, I don't know until when. I would have thought they'd stopped a long time ago. But it's just a few people showing that the planet is run by a few people. That's the unfortunate thing that we've got to wake up to. But people like you and I, Stan, and our audience, and other people like us, they're out there on every level, different levels, different segments, and the wake up is here. And that's a good thing. And these guys are so bold and so brutal and so horrible with their focus on profits and making death happen to get more profits. They're only exposing themselves, and the time for a change is here. It's people like you and I that are going to make that change in our own small way. Other people in bigger ways, that's fine. We're all part of the same team of humanity. So Russian countermeasures and sanctions. What are we going to do about that, Stan? How do you want to introduce that? I've probably messed up your introduction.
No, no problem at all. Realistically, yesterday on July 5th, I placed as my update a short publication on Russian countermeasures with Mr. Putin's picture at the top. So anyone who is LinkedIn or Google Plus user can easily find that, which gives a brief pre-story, if you like, story about these sanctions and Russian counter-sanctions, because a few days before, Mr. Putin signed a countermeasures decree, call it that way, which prolongs Russia countermeasures against those countries who initially enforced that against Russia, allegedly for involvement into Ukraine. I have my own, obviously, approach to Ukrainian topics, but I'd rather keep my mouth shut, because I would probably be much more radical than balanced Tate.
Am I balanced? Oh, that's great news. Tell my family.
Because my approach is sometimes is put your nose out of my hands. That's my approach to any involvement, because Ukrainian and Russians are the same people. That's ironically, historically, the same. And when someone tries to put the nose and teach the others, it's just my approach is just, if just imagine it's absolutely unbelievable scenario. But let's say Russians get involved into Mexico, change the government, dictate it, and try to do something on the Texas border. It would be the same. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
But we have the same story.
And then Russia would blame. And then imagine Russia would finance the new government of Mexico that they installed as puppets to actually bomb every day Americans that are living just inside the Mexican border, and then telling the U.S. That they're attacking Mexico. That's how silly it is. It's so silly, it's absurd. Yeah.
It's complete absurd. But out of it, even out of this political situation, Western sanctions against Russia and the Russian countermeasures or counter sanctions, I always try to make a practical sense out of anything, and out of it, that's definitely, and the previous, if you remember the story, Russian countermeasures against a list of the countries who were bringing those sanctions onto Russia at the beginning of 2000. In August, if I'm not mistaken, early August or late July 2014, Russia enforced those countermeasures. But what the outcome of those political games, as we see now, are realistically, in order to save or resist Western sanctions, Mr. Putin's government immediately enacted and make it up and running so-called government program of import substitution with their countermeasures. Within 2 tiny short years, Russia is among the biggest agricultural product seller in the world. Well, at least with wheat, with pork, with beef, which was never in history in the last 80 years. Yeah, some other extra pressure helped Russia to do that. The Russian ruble devalued, but the entire economy survived, and that actually paved the ground for huge opportunities for many, many businesses, international players, and some even Chinese who are famous for being used to be a switch shop for biggest industries from the West in the last 20 years. These days outsource production in the Russian Far East because it's cheaper and manpower much more advanced. And that's where production localization is one of the topics for smart international players like Mercedes-Benz. Recently announced a new factory establishing next to Moscow, for example. Not to mention Volkswagen, which was doing right after the inaction of the sanctions in 2014, investing over $1 billion in engine production facility, again, somewhere not far from Moscow and that kind of stuff. So why I'm saying about this countermeasures and political game, they directly related with, again, new opportunities. And those new opportunities, realistically, proved in the last 2-3 years that those who are interested in considering this market for steady growth definitely worth the time, at least on researching the topic. And from analysts' reviews and even unofficial comment by agricultural minister who said, well, don't forget that we benefit, our economy benefit out of our countermeasures. In other words, not allowing a ready-made agricultural product coming from the continent, for example, New Zealand or United States, or that kind of stuff. We established our industries going up and making the products and the entire production competitive. And he said that recently, I think just a week ago or so, I don't think our countermeasures will be lifted until 2020. We need some extra time to make ourselves completely sustainable internationally. Again, it seems like a kind of, it might be a kind of, seems like a typical Russian internal issue, but it's not. In particular, if you keep international investors or entrants in mind. That means that once you are here and you start developing, you register for $1,000, you register structure and start local, whatever it is, even reselling your own product from this with some additional added value and become a Russian tax subject or joint venture, doesn't really matter. Just do it openly and it's very easy. You immediately become protected and actually eligible to all those incentives, not only for your production. As I said, production localization, one of the hot topics for smart international investors, including Chinese, as I said. And Chinese would never invest a penny unless it would be profitable. But more importantly, you have immediate access to this biggest in Europe consumer market, Russia alone. But don't forget that Russia is not alone. Russia is a part of Eurasian Economic Union, similar to EU. We call it EAEU, Eurasian Economic Union, which brings you immediate opportunity to 185 million consumers. And the biggest advantage, a part of it, it's not even the size of the market, but the market is unsaturated. That's still one of the key features. And that's where the benefits or attractions are. That's how I see it all the time. That you don't in this country. Well, when I bring clients from different industries, in many cases, in many cases, you don't necessarily apply the same approach as you do with, let's say, an American launch of, let's say, IT product, because you think about how big my marketing budget would be. Well, in this case, in Russia, you don't necessarily think about the marketing investments. You think about approaching the right key targets. And if you're happy enough, you probably even can find a partner who would allow you to sell your product using their client base. You do not invest a penny, realistically, but it's gonna last forever, I think.
Early adopters will be benefiting from that.
Yeah, and those countries, including Vietnam, which joined, I think we can expand on it a little bit later, shortly, joined the free trade zone with this country. One of those ways to enter this market smoothly, benefit out of those opportunities immediately. But again, it's a little bit different model.
So sanctions haven't had the effect, except in fact, there's a strong argument for sanctions having the exact opposite effect. And what are the countermeasures Russia had? Food was a big one, continuing the sanctions on the counter sanctions. So we have sanctions from the West on Russia for doing some mysterious things that can't be explained. And we have counter sanctions from Russia, which is in response to those sanctions. So, and is it mainly food, or how would you explain these are they going to be expanded now that the Western sanctions are being announced to be extended? What is the Russian response? Could you encapsulate that in a simple idea?
Yeah, sure. Realistically, if initial Russian counter sanctions of 2014 was kind of, at least as I look at it, as a counter hit in a phase, an unexpected one, because the decree announced in the morning and hundreds of trucks from Poland with apples was just blocked at the border. They didn't know about it a minute before. They didn't. The government did not announce it. They just placed a memo on the government website and immediately sent notification to the customs at 9 o'clock in the morning, saying, "Hey, trucks you're allowed in, let them clean up. The others, kick them out. Here is the decree with immediate effect." And initially, yeah, it was kind of a political countermeasure, punch back with very sensitive industries hurt, realistically, because who are the sellers or suppliers of those food products? Farmers. And farmers were really hurt, realistically. One of those, so small to medium enterprises supplying this food product or seafood or whatever it is. But once the first year passed over and the ruble devalued twice, it became already clear, but strategically clear, not with immediate proof, that wow, that's a lot of opportunities out of it. Yeah, it was very hot. It was very painful to the Russian population because, your ruble devalued twice. And the, let's say, real income increased not that dramatically. Realistically, it's decreased. Yeah, you have to get used to it. But on the other hand, you have a lot of opportunities, and only stupids and lazy did not use them. So these days, based on 3 years experience of counter sanctions, smart way to apply them to in practical situation is that, as I said, is quite simple. Anyone with, in particular, if they're interested in this market, could just check if their products are in demand, or the knowledge, or whatever it is, or this service, or they can find targets, partners, and in most cases, more often than not, including, by the way, one of the, sorry for being not that consequently, I'm rambling a bit, but one of the litmus tests, I always say, look at any economy or developed economy. What business is quite indicative that the economy is going as a market economy. Small businesses, in particular family-run businesses like little cafes, little restaurants, or that kind of stuff. When someone asks me, hey, can you bring me some sample? I say, yeah, I live in North Moscow, and in a radius of 1 kilometer, I have 2 restaurants only. Can you imagine that? Moscow. And it's a residential area. That just demonstrates how unsaturated this market is. And it's the simplest business you can do. So those niches are countless. Look at the, again, typical American model of business, franchise. Look at the Subway story. You probably heard about the business case, Subway in Russia, what they've been doing in the last few years. The annual growth, the least annual growth I heard about is just 150%. In better years, the growth was 400, 500%, that kind of stuff. They're still expanding. It's a model of business which already tested in many, many countries, but it's not, it's too far from competition here. So it's a plethora of opportunities which are not even being thought over, if you like. And if someone is interested in anything like that, well, think about sanctions as like following the Chinese approach to opportunity. What opportunity? It's a danger, but it's what is that? It's a threat and opportunities. It's something like that. So realistically, what we can see out of those countermeasures and Russian sanctions and Western sanctions, well, a lot of government support, a lot of unfilled niches, a lot of realistically opportunities.
So that's how I see it. Sanctions haven't worked on Russia. They've helped Russia. Sanctions aren't going to work on investors that are smart enough to find the opportunity in Russia. They will also likewise help those investors, especially the early adopters. And there's no better person to carry a good idea through to fruition than Mr. Stan Grafsky.
Wow.
I would just get in touch with Stan and hire him out for a month or 3 and get some projects moving, and start with the project that you most want to move. Agree with Stan about how it should get done, come to terms, get that done, and build on solid things like that, on solid projects. Set the goalposts within a limited time frame, get something done, and that's the base. Get another thing done. So whether it's establishing some initial sales or initial agreements with, I don't know, manufacturing facilities, or maybe it's just to get some retail sales over the border and establish a name in a certain small area. Whatever the strategy is, work it out with Stan. He has very low rates that take into account a base opportunity for investors to, explore the market. And then, there may be some bonus structures in there for big wins where you can both really move together towards mutual benefits. Thanks, Stan. That's countermeasures and sanctions. What else do you want to say about that?
Well, I think kind of a good, not necessarily related with sanctions and countermeasures, but good example of the whole idea of using Russian market opportunities, probably Vietnam case. Vietnam concluded a free trade zone agreement with Russia in the last couple of years or so, and it was finally enacted last fall. So realistically, we have some kind of 6, 7, a little bit more than that, months of practical application of that free zone. But the figures of the first few months indicate that the sales or bilateral trade increased kind of 40% with this 4 months, but with it 7 months. But it's not the key here. I never honestly look into the figures of increased sales as an indications. The indication I believe here is that businesses are much more willing to go in both directions these ways, because Vietnamese, I know that from the ground, are looking, or at least some businesses are looking for partners with their manufacturing facilities or whatever core competences, bringing into the Russian either ready-made product or the ones that needs a final tuning, and sell it using the Russian distribution channel of existing partners. And I also know that a lot of Russian, in particular, textiles and seafood businesses are looking for opportunities down in Vietnam. They went there. Also, again, I cannot give the names, but I heard from my sources there are some South Asian players who, based on the information received from the Vietnamese partners, they are already using Vietnam as a business base for the entry into this market, because realistically it's a free trade agreement, which means not necessarily zero taxation, but it's
privileged tax rates for Vietnam. It's very beneficial for companies to present themselves as Vietnamese, or at least partnering with Vietnamese in order to enter into Russia. It makes perfect sense. And what a great test case for Putin to show other Asian countries. And you remind me of that when you talked about this Asian Economic Union that Russia has. One of the statements that Putin had 1 month, maybe 2 or possibly 3 months ago, he made a comment which was very interesting to me about the new Eurasian century. Now, I thought that's very interesting coming from my background in the things that I study, because not background necessarily, but interest. There's a document called the New American Century, which predated all these terror wars. And the project for a new American century is what the US is doing right now. And the method that they have in mind is exactly the methods that they're employing right now, with funding terror groups and bombing countries and stealing resources. That's it. Halliburton, $40 billion from Iraq. And the chief beneficiary is the same one who wants to make the war on fake reasons. Talk about fake news. So here we have the US model of project for a new American century. And here we have Putin's comment about a new Eurasian century. I thought that was fantastic, because the differences couldn't be more stark. Russia is Europe, Russia is Asia, Russia is Eurasian. Russia is neither, Russia's both. Russia's connected to both, Russia's doing business with both. Russia's long-term investing in technology, defense, and infrastructure, very important as well, with this Silk Road. It's incredible. The last show that we did was on Silk Road. Sorry to ramble on, Stan, but you just sparked my interest. I think Vietnam fits perfectly into the strategy. It's Putin he just plays chess, and these guys are playing, I don't know, checkers or marbles or something else. They don't understand what he's doing. He's defeating them on every front. One man against 30 heads of state. But the difference is, one man loves his country and represents his people. And those 30 guys, they've sold us out a long time ago. Their whole system's bankrupt. So it is a new multipolar world that we all want. I represent a large group of people, whether they know it or not. I feel as if I represent all of the billions of people that don't want to see a new American century dominate the world. It's better we have a multipolar world with Eurasians working together with, my part, which is down in, we are all a cooperative world if we want to be. It's only the politicians and their paid off structures that want different. Military industrial complex, namely, chief among them. But so you're getting back to Vietnam as a test case. It's proven. That's your statement. It's proven. It's already been done.
Yeah, and I know there is a number of other free trade agreements, mainly with countries of Southeast Asia, is in the process of discussion. The question is when those documents are to be finalized, and in particular under the angle of most recent adjustment to the pact, which was run by US and with the previous administration, and these days is led by China. By the way, the political level, if I don't know if your audience saw that or noticed that or not, but it's a very interesting fact. Mr. What's his name? Xi Jinping, I hardly pronounce his name, leader of China, was awarded with the Russian highest government award recently, St. Andrew's Order, which realistically demonstrates obviously his personal involvement in the development of the relationship between these two countries, Russia and China, but more importantly, it's a demonstration of the counter-involvement of two countries. And I think it's a great sign for again, I'm pretty distant from all these political issues, but I think it's a great sign that all those Chinese-Russian initiatives in economy, whether most of the people outside believe them, they're vital or not, even 2-3 years ago, now proved to be more than viable, more than sustainable, and that kind of stuff. Look at the comments in the mainstream video, even the Russian comments, so-called opposition media, saying, "Wow, Siberia gas pipeline is absolutely unprofitable," something like that. Wow, bullshit. It's going to be launched soon. It's already proven. Look at the. I understand it's a big mega contracts. Obviously, they're run by government control companies. It's one story, but look at the figures of AliExpress sales into this kind of cross-border. Very simple, nothing to add. They increase not just year by year, but these days quarter by quarter, and that proves that the trade between these just two countries is going up and up and up and up without being any sophistication. As I said, well, production localization would be a little bit more sophisticated, but even in simple trade, cross-border trade. And the most recent Yandex research of data from sales prove, and it's in my group, LinkedIn group, one of those indicators, that sales of cross-border sales going through the roof. That means that the market is too far from saturation. That's just, a consumer vote with their wallet, as always.
Well said. Big opportunities in Russia, and Stan is the man to show that. I want to talk just about this. I've got this. There's the Saker. There's the Saker.is, is run by a very pro-Russian analytical and economics review of the situation in Russia. There's some key findings in an article. This is a very reliable source, the saker.is, Iceland. It's in Iceland right now. They have many different outlets. You can find the Saker and you can look up this article. It's called Made in Russia, SITREP 4. So he's done a few SITREPs, situational reports. So I think it's a military term or an intelligence term. Anyway, key findings from this Saker article that just came out. Russian economy has successfully adjusted to dual shock sanctions and oil price plunge. So the dual shock attempt to make Russia collapse, which worked in the Soviet times, didn't work now. There's a minor loss of GDP, just 2.3% for 3 years of sanctions. That's nothing. And will be completely recovered in 2017 with an expected 2 to 3% growth. So sanctions have helped. There's economic numbers that prove it, macro and also situational, specific to different regions and different industries as well, of course. Oil and gas share of GDP drops to below 10%. So everyone says, oh, Russia is very dependent on energy sales. Well, that was true, but you have to understand which Russia we're talking about, the Russia of Yeltsin era or the Russia of Putin era, two absolutely different countries in terms of economy and sufficiency. Industrial production stable at 2014 to 2016, and it's booming now. It's going up in this year, 2017. Already by May, it's 5.3% growth in 2017, according to the Saker. Russian economy now is the most diversified in the world. Here it is. Exports remain relatively undiversified, but domestic production highly diversified and self-sufficient. So there we go. And the debt crisis predicted by the Western pundits have failed to materialize. And they go on with a large list. And at the end of the list, they say, however, there are some clear negative data. Salaries, disposable income, and consumption. Retail sales also down. So there are some things that aren't up, but on average, with all of the coordinated attacks that Russia has endured, it reminds me really of something like World War II, putting up with so much attacks and then rebounding back and becoming a first world state once again from, you can't beat a good idea or good people. They just keep coming back, and Russia's proven that again and again and again. I'd much rather have one Russian friend than one Russian enemy. That's for sure. I'd rather have any number of fake friends than one Russian enemy, to be sure. But yeah, I thought that was quite interesting to review. Everyone saying the same thing, even the IMF and World Bank. Another article that I have here, just wrapping up with my own sort of research for this. Paul Craig Roberts was a U.S. Treasury Secretary. He worked under Ronald Reagan, and he is considered the founder, or at least co-founder, of Reaganomics, which was a big thing to us in America at the time. So he's an important Washington insider who knows what he's talking about. And he's been pro-Russia since day one. I mean, not so much pro-Russia, that's my terminology. He's been on the side of truth since day one, and he's seen through the lies since day one because he knows the people, he knows who's lying, he knows how they lie. He's an intelligence guy, he's an economics guy, he's a political guy. And this is Dr. Craig Roberts right here, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. According to the Russian press, the Chinese and Russian governments are concluding a joint military agreement. It has to do with the Common Face Alliance against the United States. So there we go. We're not only talking about economic cooperation, we're talking about preparing, because if you don't prepare for bad things, the bad things will be invited to happen more easily. This Russian and Chinese cultures go back thousands of years. It's not a 100-year-old country or 200. When we, the United States, this is Paul Craig Roberts again, go in there and remove these secular leaders in the Middle East, we create chaos and then the chaos helps to foment jihadism. Then it extends to the next country. See, he's showing how the new American century functions on profits of those oil stolen from these countries. So it has been our strategy, and I think it's recognized by Russia and China, and it's directed at them. So the word is out. Everyone understands. It becomes a factor when there's a run on the dollar. So that's how Dr. Paul Craig Roberts sees this coming to an end, when there's a run on the dollar. So if Russia and Iran and all these other countries, as Iraq tried to do, as Libya tried to do, to make their own currency sales on energy sales, getting away from the petrodollar, that's really the Achilles heel of this giant warmongering machine, ending the petrodollar, ending the fiat, the power of the privately owned Federal Reserve over the politicians and courts and industries and big banks, big financing companies, obviously the press and politicians as well. So bringing that to an end is going to be very hard, because although Donald Trump talked a nice message in the beginning of some of his message was quite positive, it looks like he's held hostage, according to this other article that I've printed up that I found relevant by Stephen Lenben. He says that Trump is hostage to bipartisan anti-Russia neocons infesting his administration and Congress. No amount of one-on-one talks with Putin will improve bilateral relations as long as America's imperial agenda remains unchanged. And it looks like it will remain unchanged for a while. So it looks like there will be a continuation of sanctions for a while. But we don't know. It could end at any time. And when it does end, all those people that have taken advantage of this opportunity will be in a very good position to benefit. Not only themselves and their pocketbook and the people they work with, but also feeling good about yourself, doing the right thing, going out there and making something happen in a way that benefits yourself, but also does something better for the world. Because these fake aggressive, there's fake reasons for making aggression, whether it's economic or otherwise, they should be challenged by all of us who have just one life to live. We can get more money. We can't get more time. We have to make time count, Stan. We have to do what's right. So let's help our investors get across the border, meet you, get their products into the system. And you've got lots of stories. If someone has a question about your credibility or your knowledge, see who you are. They get a sense of you as a person. And I've heard other people say that comes through loud and clear. Just listen to you. This is unscripted. This is unedited. This is uncut. You see us for who we are. Our flaws are coming out. We're not professionals. We're just people. We're just talking. We just have a passion. And when we put our mind to something, we get it done, Stan. So thanks for joining me on this, well, I guess you can call it a presentation to investors into the new Russia, the second Russia boom since I've been alive.
Well, I hope it finally could be called as a boom. My feeling, most of, at least Western countries' reps, they kind of a little bit confused. You know, on one story, they're under pressure of mainstream media and fears they got from there as a consequences of those information attacks. On the other hand, when I start dealing with them, you see, you know, absolutely rational people, and they understand everything. It's so simple. Wow, but it takes time to bring or to prove that the opportunities are really here, and there's nothing horrible which sometimes I hear from mainstream media in this country, you know. But it takes time, yeah.
Let's leave all your links as usual, Stan. People can get in touch with you on LinkedIn. They can reach you on, well, we'll leave other contact info. You've got a website, you've got email, you've got a phone. I'm not sure if you want to make that public. You probably do have a phone on your website.
Yeah, all the telephone numbers, everything is quite open.
Okay.
I'm contactable anytime except overnight.
Okay, very good. And obviously we'll continue these talks from time to time. This is just coming in front of the big Trump-Putin meeting. Yeah. And we didn't really talk about the big Trump-Putin meeting. Everyone's building it up into something as if it's going to be a transformational event. I don't believe it will be, but it could point to some interesting developments. That's the most hope I have for this event in Hamburg on the 7th and 8th, or well, tomorrow and the next day, I think.
Yeah, it's 7th and 8th, if I'm not mistaken. Well, we already had the first experience, making forecasts on positive changes after Trump came to the power over a year ago. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Probably we were over-optimistic.
Yeah, I was over-optimistic. I admit that I have been naive on a number of different fronts. I always think that we're rounding the corner, but I underestimate the power of those who have control, clearly. But I don't think it's a bad thing. Being naively optimistic is good, so long as you back it up with determination to see it through.
Yeah,
I'm going to see it through. I'm not going to quit.
Actually, I would be happy to get back to this topic after that meeting. At least we'll have some results, what is out there, because I can hear quite a conflicting, sometimes unrelated between themselves, comments from different sources saying that, Putin is not prepared, which is bullshit, obviously. Putin's always prepared. He's a KGB guy. But the administration is not prepared, or they put pedal on the brake or something like that. Again, let's see it first and see what comes out of it. And then we'll have some thoughts. Actually, knowing that, as you call him, Mr. Putin is a great chess master, he might make an offer or two which rational Mr. Trump would not deny, because it's all about rationalism. It's all about common sense in the first place.
It is. I thought Putin handled the president of Turkey and the Turkish situation very, very deftly, very incredibly, like a master, absolute master. Here we had Turkey pulled over to the U.S., incentivized by the EU, the magic of the EU. So he was hypnotized. He actually was bombing. He actually shot a MiG out of the sky. He was killing Russians. He was fighting for ISIS, hitting Assad on behalf of the U.S. Partnership. And he ended the oil for a while. It's restarted recently, thanks to the diplomacy and forgiveness of Putin, because Putin doesn't hold grudges. If it's better for his people to not hold a grudge, he'll let it go. That is so far beyond what we consider a master statesman. That is beyond mastery of statesmanship. To put your own grudges down, which are obviously very deeply felt. This betrayal of shooting a MiG from behind, which was considered to be friendly, by the Turkish military, and then to enter into the game against Russian interest, against Syrian interest, against the people. It's absurd to bring in all this ISIS oil at 1/2 or 1/3 the market rates. That was a big incentive, billions of dollars. And there's videos of them going back and forth through the Turkish border that were published and admitted. But what did Putin do? He put his ego down, and now he's got energy agreements with Turkey. He's got the pipeline back on stream. Turkey is turning its back politically on the United States, and Turkey has presented itself as willing to go after militarily after ISIS. Now, I know that the Kurdish situation is part of that picture, but Putin would understand that as well. So I'm in awe. I'm in awe just to watch Putin run circles around these other leaders on Ukraine, on Syria, on the sanctions, on the economy, so I agree with you. He's going to pull a rabbit out of a hat like a magician. Once again, when he's in Hamburg, he might. I wouldn't put it past him. We just need to watch this guy. He's on fire. He's gifted. Let's just put it like that. Maybe even watched over by some powerful higher spiritual entities, knowing that time is short on the earth unless we get some sensible people involved in politics, because it hasn't been much sense coming from the West in recent decades.
Yeah.
So with that, I guess I'm finished. I said more than I took more time than I should have from you. You've presented a great case here for investors. Once again, Stan, and you've presented the timeliness of it, and you've addressed which sectors can benefit and how to benefit, and the mentality of how to benefit. Folks, this is free information. If you're technology, if you want to go to Russia, if you want to, I mean, he said it. It's the taxes are low. Establish yourself as a taxpayer. That's what Russia wants. The funds are there. The time is now. Investigate. It's not expensive. You can keyword search a lot of this. You can investigate with similar industries that you know, that where countries you're familiar with, and start there. Then give Stan a call and give him the hard questions. I would suggest going on a route like that. Get comfortable yourself to level A. Then on level B, identify those questions you believe are challenging. Go to Stan.
Thank you. Thank you. And from my side, definitely, I'll be happy to comment any inconvenient or unpleasant questions if some people consider them, whatever it is. If I don't know, my answer is always, I don't know. It's as simple as that.
Spoken like a Russian. Don't you have some fancy way of saying you don't know in such a way that people think you know, but you
well, actually, it's funny. It's a funny question. You know why? Originally, I'm not from Moscow. I'm not Muscovite. And as the guy who moved into Moscow in the 90s, initially I was kind of shy, admiring all these Muscovites as a gifted people. They say me gods or something like that. It's a quite kind of typical complex, psychological complex of provincial people. And when I joined a US law firm, I was listening carefully to my colleagues. At the end of then I finally became a partner of it. But initially I was listening, a lot of it. And sometimes I was listening and hearing a lot of bullshit going into the client, and client was, just consuming, and I was just keeping my mouth shut. And the magic answer to your question was articulated a number of times by my colleagues when they have absolutely no idea about the question, even where it's coming from, and don't even understand whether it's law or it's some, economics or whatever it is. The question is to make a pause first and say, this topic is not directly interpreted in the Russian law. It requires extra research. Because we're very much responsible to our clients, we do not want to mislead you. So we would be very much happy to help. So it's not going to cost you a lot, just 2-3 hours of our time. So, we'll prepare a report. And some people paid, of course, but when I was listening to that, and that story was repeated in other law firms I dealt with, or we were partnering with, and when I was on my own already. But after that, I already was listening and said, oh, shit, I heard that bullshit before. That says you know nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey,
no, realistically, I try to be honest. I'm not sure whether all the time or not all the time, but I'm prepared to say. I don't feel shame saying I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have a friend in St. Petersburg, and I remember his statement. He says that generally speaking, Russians are much better to deal with as you get further away from Moscow. And he married someone from Magadan.
Actually, I think that's true. People much more open, and with so-called crowns on their heads, they don't consider themselves, kind of established or elite people or that kind of stuff, like.
But I do, just for clarity, I know some friends will be watching this. I do have good friends in Moscow, even Muscovites, and you can find good people everywhere, really. So the old, stereotypes are fun, but yeah.
That's it's just one of those approaches which are present. And the same story I heard from New York, or from my very closest friend in the United States. He's in San Francisco, and he was saying it's the same about states. If you talk about New York and San Francisco or LA, kind of certain groups of snobbish people, and the rest is just from kind of countryside, something like that.
Stan, I think we've accomplished a lot here with this show. It's probably could have been run more professionally or structured, but there's something about unstructured approaches I think that people can appreciate now in this overly structured, overly refined mass media world. And I think we have a place in that. Whether it's big or small, I think it doesn't matter. We're doing it because we enjoy it and we see a purpose in it, and I'm fine with that. Thanks for joining me, Stan. I'm always ready to support you. You've supported me in Moscow. You support the company that I founded, and it's a pleasure to work with you in business and in friendship. So thanks for joining me again for this show, Stan. And goodbye to everyone. We'll be back.
Thank you very much.
Make sure when you have any questions, check in the notes, and we'll link you up with Stan. You can save your best questions for Stan.
Thank you very much, Tate. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.